It's never been a secret that I love Red Dwarf. I wear my love for this British sci-fi sitcom on my Smeg-laden sleeve. The series is one that I can remember watching from as far back as the early 90s, when arguably it was at its peak. In fact, the first episode I can remember watching was Series 5's Terraform. Red Dwarf often falls in the crack of mainstream comedy owing to its sci-fi setting, and to be fair, sci-fi sitcoms can be a tricky thing to get right, can't they? Hyperdrive. But right from its almost hidden origins in 1988, Red Dwarf has more often than not delivered rather than failed, 2009's Back to Earth notwithstanding. And in the decade-long gap where Red Dwarf seemed lost in the wilderness following a slightly wobbly, but interestingly mainstream 8th series in 1999, I constantly rewatched but never exhausted the show. The basic premise is this. Dave Lister, played by Craig Charles, finds himself as the last remaining human being in existence when a radiation leak wipes out the crew of the clapped-out mining ship Red Dwarf. Awaking 3 million years in the future, following a bout of suspended animation as punishment for sneaking an unquarantined cat on board, his only companions are the ship's senile former genius computer, Holly, a hologrammatically reproduced image of his anal former bunkmate, Rimmer, and a human-like creature who evolved from the offspring of the aforementioned cat, played by Norman Lovett, and later Hattie Hayridge, Chris Barry and Danny John Jules respectively. Later picking up Mechanoid Crichton, played by Robert Llewellyn, in its 3rd series, and an alternate dimension version of Lister's ex-girlfriend Christine Kachansky, played by Chloe Annette, although originally Altered Image's Claire Grogan. Week by week, the crew would laze about in the deliberate emptiness of space, and given the writer's strict no aliens policy, this may seem like a dull and unappealing proposition. In fact, this led to the series taking roughly 3 years or so to actually get commissioned. However, its creators, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, were never short of putting a bizarre but still very human touch to science fiction situations. With the series now having been going for slightly less time than I've been alive, there is now 73 episodes of this, for some reason still, fairly niche show. As with any series though, there are 1 or 2 adventures that fall slightly below the mark, but today I'm going to focus on my personal highlights. From across all 12, yes, 12, for the purposes of expediency and clarity, I am classing the 3-part special Back to Earth as Series 9, series of the show, from its origins in 1988 through to its recent revivals on Dave. I will be picking my favourite episode per series. Bear in mind these are my personal favourites and, I shouldn't have to say this but this is YouTube after all, are by no means the definitive letter of the law on the matter. So join me as we travel 3 million years into the future, well 31 years in the past really, for Red Dwarf, 31 Years of Smeg, Part 1 BBC Years. Series 1, Future Echoes. Some people consider Red Dwarf's first series to be a fairly weak start, a sentiment shared by its creators it seems, as they specifically requested it not to be repeated before its 2nd series later the same year. However, it wasn't without its highlights. It set its stall out very well, the terse relationship between Lister and Rimmer is well established, the cat is more cat-like now than ever, and Norman Lovett's deadpan stylings mark it out as not just a sitcom, not just a sci-fi show. This is most evident in the 2nd episode, Future Echoes. Having the unfortunate task of showcasing what the writers intend Red Dwarf to be following its exposition-heavy premiere, The End. In an attempt to return to Earth, Holly plans on turning the ship around and then hitting light speed for the rest of the journey, meaning Lister and the cat would have to re-enter stasis as the journey may still take much longer than any of them would live to see. When Holly accidentally hits light speed early, the crew are subjected to visions of the near immediate future. They try to just deal with it until Holly can slow down, but when Rimmer witnesses Lister blowing himself up, it seems Dave might never return home. At least in one piece anyway. Future Echoes is a brilliant fusion of probably plausible science and quick snappy writing. aided by the more comfortable performances from the main cast who seem to have found their characters. Something which may be enhanced by the fact it was the 4th episode to be recorded for the series.
Oh yes, I expect they cured death the instant we left Earth. I expect doctors' surgeries are packed with the dead. Hello, Mrs. Johnson. Take one of these 3 times a day, you'll soon be living again. Carol, next corpse, please.
Series 2. Queeg. Despite Series 2's marginally larger budget and sudden availability for location shooting, my highlight for Series 2 is the entirely dwarf-bound Queeg. When Holly fails to warn the Dwarfers of an impending meteor hit, Red Dwarf's backup computer Queeg 500 takes over and reduces Holly to a mere night watchman. Queeg turns out to be rather too efficient and puts them through grueling schedules and extreme psychotic physical routines, leading the crew to question whether things were really better run by a computer who gets all his knowledge from the coloured Junior Encyclopedia of Space. Queeg was the perfect example of Grant and Naylor's ability to write lines and scenes specifically for their cast, featuring a hilarious scene where Rimmer takes on the personalities of random members of Red Dwarf's deceased crew, and abusing Craig Charles's preponderancy to do his own stunts. Standout Player of the Match award must go to Norman Lovett, however. His defeated demeanour throughout the episode is played pitch perfectly right up until the show's amazing twist ending. I defy you to not at least well up a little at the climax.
See you, Dave. Hope it works out with you and Kachansky.
Cheers, Hol.
See you, Kat. I hope one day in the not too distant future you fulfil your heart's desire and get your end away.
Series 3. Marooned. Series 3 was a major change in appearance and direction for Red Dwarf, recasting, and in fact changing gender of, Holly, and bringing in new permanent cast member Crichton into the fold. Once again, in what seems to be a recurring trend on this list, it's a small contained sci-fi light episode, Marooned. When Holly identifies that Red Dwarf is about to sail through a patch of black holes, it's recommended that the crew abandon the dwarf and meet up with the ship on the other side. In what would become a trend with their flights on Starbug, Lister and Rimmer are knocked out of space and crash land on an ice planet, and while awaiting an unlikely rescue, are forced to talk to each other. Marooned is more or less entirely a two-hander, with Dave and Arnold locked into a waiting for Godot-esque situation. The episode contains many scenes and jokes which are often cited by Dwarf fans as the apex of the series. Craig Charles himself often cites that he'd love to reproduce the episode on stage. There's also a grueling scene involving a tin of dog food.
And you can take that look off your face like I'm doing something disgusting. I'm just trying to stay alive.
Series 4. White Hole. While it's fairly obvious that I prefer the more character-centred episodes of Red Dwarf, I'm not averse to its more sci-fi heavy episodes. And although Series 4 was comparatively, given what came before and indeed after it, a weak point, White Hole is an underrated highlight. In an attempt at regaining her former glorious IQ of 6,000, Holly attempts a technique that boosts her IQ to over twice what it once was, but at the expense of her lifespan. With less than 2 minutes left to live, Holly shuts herself down, taking with her most of the dwarf's functions. Plunged into darkness with only an exercise bike to generate electricity, the crew discover that Red Dwarf is being pulled into a white hole, essentially a reversed black hole. They must now turn to super genius, but close to death, Holly, for a solution. White Hole features some hilarious scenes and dialogue, whether it's Talkie Toaster's obsession with finding out if newly smart Holly wants toast, or any other myriad of bready products, or the cat's confusion over what's going on at all. The episode is a high point in a rare, less than stellar series of Red Dwarf.
Ask me a sensible question. Preferably one that isn't bread related.
Very well. I have a third question. A sensible question. A question that will tax your new IQ to its very limits and stretch the sinews of your knowledge to bursting point.
This is going to be about waffles, isn't it?
Series 5. Back to Reality. With one eye on transferring Red Dwarf to the US, Grant and Naylor played a bit of a prank on the cast, and indeed us, for this episode. Starting out with the apparent death of our heroes and the reveal that things may not be how they have seemed for the last 4 years. While exploring an underwater seeding ship, the Dwarfers are attacked by a despair squid, a genetically engineered creature that uses its ink to induce crippling depression on its would-be attackers. Whilst trying to flee, Starbug crashes. No one survives. Game over. They then awaken back on, presumably, Earth, and discover they have all been participants in a total immersion video game called Red Dwarf. And boy were they bad at it. Adjusting to their new situation, they discover that in reality, they may not be the people they always thought they were. With a brilliant bait and switch ending, Back to Reality is the epitome of fan trolling, featuring amazing guest performances from Timothy Spall and Lenny Van Dolen, who apparently doesn't know how to hold a gun, despite its oversized magazine. The episode also introduced us to the Duke of Dork, the Prince of Polyester, the Uncle of Uncool, and whatever, Dwayne Dibley. Series 6. Out of Time. Picking just one episode from Series 6 was bloody tough. The change of format for the show was a, albeit unnecessary, nice switch up. Losing Red Dwarf and consequently Holly, Lister, Rimmer, Crichton and Kat are forced to scour space for traces of their former home, meeting brain-slurping weather girls, latex-bound gimps, simulants, cowboys, and perhaps most frightening of all, a planet of Rimmers. Along the way, Lister gets married, and Rimmer gets a physical presence, when the production crew remember, that is.
Systems and power up your hard light drive. Come on guys, let's get these wagons rolling.
However, it's the series finale that gets my vote here. In Out of Time, Starbug chances across a ship with a working time drive, a device that allows them to travel in time, but not, it seems, at this point anyway, more on that in a moment, space. After soaking in the heady air of 15th century deep space, a distress call is received from themselves, from the future. The episode is a remarkable close to Red Dwarf's strongest series, and despite a few behind the scenes issues, the script was still being written and adjusted on the day of recording, requiring the use of idiot balls and auto cues throughout a good proportion of it. Delivers all the same laughs any other episode of Red Dwarf would, while also providing a gripping plot culminating in the destruction of Starbug, yet again, and the show's first, but not last, to be continued. Although that was very nearly actually the end.
Well, how did it go? Everything okay?
Mr. Lister, sir. I love you.
Series 7, Ticket to Ride. Like the ship did in the series, Red Dwarf vanished from our screens, losing one of its writers, Rob Grant, leaving over not wanting a 5-mile-long millstone around his neck along the way. Returning in early 1997 with a new look. By removing one frame out of every 24, it seemed to give the series a filmic gloss. Something they accidentally achieved on the Blu-ray version of Series 5. Recalls of the discs are available, links in the description. A new production method. They pre-recorded the entire series, then showed it to a live audience. And, 3 episodes in, a new cast member. Chris Barry wanted to focus his attention on other projects, the stupid but often mismaligned The British Empire. But before he did, he completed the first 2 episodes, and put one in the bank to appear in flashbacks. In true Red Dwarf style, the cliffhanger ending from the previous series was wrapped up very quickly, and deliberately confusing. So confusing that Lister's camera explodes trying to explain it. In short, after 4 years, Red Dwarf was back, and what an opening. Ticket to Ride starts with the news of a horrific casualty of the fight with their future selves. Not Kat nor Crichton, not even Rimmer. Lister's curry supplies. After literally changing Crichton's mind over using the inexplicably, upgraded time drive to travel temporarily back to Earth to replenish their stock of spicy foods and poppadoms, they find themselves in Dallas in 1963 and accidentally change the course of history. They barge Lee Harvey Oswald out of a window. With history changed, the crew find themselves in a new alternate Earth where the US is run by criminals. Wow, didn't we avoid that fate? And must ask the most unlikely culprit to take aim from behind a grassy knoll.
All the current supplies have been destroyed.
We heard. As a mark of respect, we thought on Sunday at 12 o'clock we could have a minute's flatulence.
Series 8. Cassandra. After the lukewarm, albeit grateful receptions of the last series, Red Dwarf somewhat returned to its roots for Series 8. Bringing back Red Dwarf itself, Rimmer, the live audience, and, perhaps most controversially, the rest of the original crew in a slightly convoluted plot involving nanobot technology. Red Dwarf became a mainstream, very ordinary sitcom, throwing off the shackles of its previously interesting situations and sci-fi silliness for essentially a remake of Porridge in space. With the crew thrown into prison for allegedly stealing Starbug, the Dwarfers are somewhat faded into the mix in an ensemble piece incorporating largely former and, at the time, future EastEnders actors in a mess of CGI and shonky practical effects which never seem to gel in with the usual handmade but always well done look of the previous series. Though a welcome return comes from the bunk room scenes. It was nice to have good old-fashioned Lister and Rimmer scenes again. While hard to pick from this just slightly better than mediocre series, I have to give it to Cassandra. This episode sees Lister accidentally signing our heroes up for the Canaries, Red Dwarf's convict army of advanced scouts, not, as Lister first thought, the ship's choir. On their first mission, they discover a derelict ship at the bottom of an ocean planet, helmed by supercomputer Cassandra, a computer with a knack of predicting the future. Having discovered the ship's secret, the Canaries prepare to return to Red Dwarf, but when Cassandra predicts the entire team will be killed before they leave, the question of their fate seems an already answered one, no matter how hard they try.
And I think I've come up with something which means you can serve your entire 2-year sentence in just 14 weeks.
Oh, brilliant. What have I got to do?
Become a dog.
Well, that wraps it up for the classic series of Red Dwarf. After Series 8, the show disappeared for a decade, but they did leave us with one very knicker-moistening tease. Thanks for watching and allowing me to indulge my love of this classic series. I'd love to hear your favourite episodes or bits in the comment section below. As usual, leave a like on the video, if indeed you do. Share it with your friends, annoy them with it and that. Subscribe to the channel. I plan on getting out a video a week for the foreseeable future.